You're affectionately known as Mr. Square by some people in the industry for your trademark square format images, and it mostly comes from this camera here, the Hasselblad V system. So what part has this camera played in your career?
It's played a huge part, partly because every single time I've got the Hasselblad V system in my hands, I feel just that I've just picked up my friend, and that means an enormous amount to me. And I will have to admit to you, it's very emotional, it's very nostalgic, and I was rather amused just the other day when I pressed the shutter next to somebody, and they didn't see that I had a camera on in my hand, and he said, that sounds like a Hasselblad, and it is a most incredibly distinctive shutter release button, which we know. But Square, I do know that human vision, of course, is more oval, really, and then the parameters of human vision are not, you know, super wide. Obviously, if you have a super wide lens on, then you see with that lens probably more than you might with your own vision, where you can focus and concentrate. So the Square is slightly disagrees, if you like, with human vision, but I grew so fond of it. I really did. It made you be very disciplined in terms of your composition and the elements that you were going to incorporate into that Square. And after all, those bits, I call them a production. Actually, I don't really say photograph anymore. I think it's a multi-dimensional production with so much going on, and it's very easy to see globally. But the viewer, a bit like I always think interior design, they come into a room and they say, "Oh, isn't this lovely?" But they may not necessarily see all the bits, but you should have done. And a landscape photographer is a noticer. So I noticed a lot with Square and love it very much indeed, and still to this day.
Okay, so how many V system cameras have you owned during your career?
Well, surprisingly, I think I have to be honest. I don't think probably more than 3. Because they you know, they just go on and on. They really do. And I always like to think that I think I'm right in saying, and you might have to help me here, Mark, that the very first V system came out around 1957, and that's really exciting, really, to think that I'm holding a camera that first began life in 1957. So there is another thing to add to that, which we might talk about in a little while when we talk about get onto the digital area.
Yeah, well, let's move on to that then. So you've now also used the 907X. So the beauty of this camera is it's almost 2 cameras in one. So you can use it as a standalone camera with what we call the 907X body, which uses our X system lenses. So how familiar is that to what you're used to with the V system cameras?
Well, what is quite marvelous is that the Hasselblad back maintains my sentimental aspect of my photography and the nostalgic aspect, because that digital back will sit so sweetly, just like the film back did on the back of my V system. And it's just extraordinary that I think you might have to help me, but I'm pretty sure that that digital back will have started life maybe in the 2019, 2020, and it's going onto the back of a camera that was made in 1957. And I think that is the most absolutely wonderful thing for people who perhaps have not fully realized that you can put a back made up a couple of days ago, almost, let's say, okay, 2 to 3 years, onto a system that you might have had, you know, some 60 odd years previously. So I do find that as a really inspired thing to have done. Yes, there she blows. And so we haven't lost sight in any way of the character of this marvelous camera, and I must say I'm wedded to it as I have been for many years.
Okay, and another question we always get on these webinars is what lenses do you have? You know, what are your go-to lenses for your work?
That's a very, very good question. The reason it's a good question is because I think I tend to not use long lenses very much. and I suspect that I would use a lens that pretty well is, I hate the word commensurate, but in keeping with my own human vision. So I don't tend to look long and far away. Maybe a small percentage of my photography is as a consequence of a long lens, but I think I've always enjoyed the 50, the 80, the standard lens, and probably the 150, and that's pretty much me, I think. I do have a 250, but which I've enjoyed from time to time, but I think somewhere between the 50, the 80, and the 150, and now that I'm using this CFV 250C back and the accompanying lens that we looked at a moment ago, that's hugely enjoyable. And of course, I did have an SWC for a while, 38, which was a marvelous thing to have. So I'm well looked after with the range of lenses, but on the whole, I think it would be 50, 80, and 150.